Good morning. As we gather in worship on this, the second Sunday in the season of Easter, I greet you in the name of the risen Christ, who moves among and within us this day, blessing us with hope and with healing. As we gather in the separateness of our homes, we are made one by a love that continues to defy death and isolation with the promise of new life. As we gather, I invite you to listen for the gospel lesson for this day. It is the story of Thomas, and it comes from the Gospel of John, the 20th chapter, reading verses 19 to 31. When it was evening on that day, the first day of the week, and the doors of the house where the disciples had met were locked for fear of the Jews, Jesus came and stood among them and said, "Peace be with you." After he said this, he showed them his hands and his side. The disciples rejoiced when they saw the Lord. Jesus said to them again, "Peace be with you. As the Father has sent me, so I send you." When he had said this, he breathed on them and said to them, "Receive the Holy Spirit. If you forgive the sins of any, they are forgiven them. If you retain the sins of any, they are retained." But Thomas, who was called the twin, one of the 12, was not with them when Jesus came. So the other disciples told him, "We've seen the Lord." But Thomas said to them, "Unless I see the mark of the nails in his hands, and I put my finger in the mark of the nails and my hand in his side, I will not believe." A week later, the disciples were again in the house. Thomas was with them. Although the doors were shut, Jesus came and stood among them and said, "Peace be with you." Then he said to Thomas, "Put your finger here. See my hands. Reach out your hand. Put it in my side. Do not doubt, but believe." Thomas answered him, "My Lord and my God." Jesus said to him, "Have you believed because you've seen me? Blessed are those who have not seen and yet come to believe." Now Jesus did many other signs in the presence of his disciples, which are not written in this book, but these are written so that you may come to believe that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of God, and that through believing you may have life in his name. May God bless to our living and to our witnessing this reading from Scripture. Amen. Excuse me. As we gather, let us bring to God our prayers for our community and for our world. Let us pray. Into your presence we come, O God, gathering our spirits together as one community, even as we must keep our physical bodies separate and isolated in this pandemic time. Yours is the voice of new life, O God. Yours is the song that can be heard in the cries of geese returning home. Yours is the song that can be heard in the thrill of songbirds building nests, preparing that place for new life to hatch forth. Yours is the persistent spirit, breaking in upon places of fear and isolation, as surely as crocuses and mayflowers break through the frozen earth to bloom with fragrance and beauty. As fishermen pile their traps on the wharves, and farmers measure fields for planting, we give thanks for signs that proclaim your persistent care for your people. Even as creation bears witness to your love, you call us to bear witness to the grace and compassion of the risen Christ. Gracious God, you invite us to reach out with word and deed, to bear witness to our sisters and brothers, to remind them that they have not been forgotten, that they are not alone. Our prayers are many this day, O God. Prayers for all who are grieving the death of loved ones. Prayers for all who are anxious and fearful in the midst of economic uncertainties. prayers for those who sit and wait and worry for loved ones that they can't visit in hospital or nursing home. Hear our prayers, O God, for your shalom, your peace, healing wounded and broken lives, calming fearful spirits in the way of the risen one. In this week, help us, O God, to live with hope-filled hearts, to step into each day grounded in the promise of new life that is the blessing of the risen one. May our eyes remain open to behold the one who accompanies us in the dawn of a new day and in the shadows of nighttime unknowns. Help us to behold the gifts of your extraordinary love in the ordinary moments of each day. Amen. Many of us at some point in our lives are asked to bear witness. Some may literally be called to bear witness at a trial, to testify to an event testify to something you have seen or heard or experienced firsthand. Others among us may be asked to witness a signature, a passport, a marriage certificate, someone's last will and testament. Some of us along the way may have been asked by our parents to bear witness to the circumstances that led to that empty cookie jar on the kitchen counter, or the broken window with the baseball lying on the other side of it. In our world, a good witness is someone who observes detail carefully and is able to testify by word or action to what she or he has seen or heard. On this second Sunday in the Easter season, I'd like to begin by sharing a story about the gift and the power of witness. The story is about a man named George. He was an extraordinarily ordinary person whose living would testify to the potential that lies within every one of us. George's daily life was a constant witnessing. It was a constant testimony to the love that he had for all with whom he shared his life. He spent his days witnessing to the giftedness and the wonder of creation. He testified by living daily with care and respect on the land. He placed solar panels on his property. He discovered healthy ways to fertilize the land. He always lived well and graciously on the earth. Witnessing the loneliness of a good friend of his, George would pause each day to listen to Nate's hopes and dreams. Witnessing the struggle of a colleague whose cultural reality was quite different than his own, George determined to learn a second language. He knew another friend so well that he could testify as to whether or not that man was having a good day or not, simply by looking at the clothes the man was wearing. George witnessed Lacey, a single mom trying to raise 2 children, and he offered her the support she needed to get established in a small business. George knew his friends and neighbors. He knew what made them laugh and what made them cry. He knew when they struggled. His own care and respect for them was a strong, visible testimony to his care for them. George's story is at the heart of a movie called Phenomena that came out. It was out a number of years ago. Some of you may have seen it. Some of you may have watched it even recently on Netflix. Phenomena bears witness to what can happen when we choose to live the potential that lies within each of us. In the movie, there comes a point when the power of George's witness is so powerful that it scares some people. It causes others to stand back in awe and wonder, and it confuses still others. George bears witness to life and to resurrection as he sees, as he listens, as he experiences the struggles and the joys of his community. Choosing to live his own life with an attentiveness that keeps him connected to others, George is able to always reach out with respect and with care for those around him. And in turn, to discover and to help them to discover their own giftedness and potential. In this morning's gospel lesson, we are invited into the story of another community, witnessing to their own experience of resurrection life. We hear how the community of Jesus' followers gathered in fear and confusion in the days following the events of Holy Week. We hear how these little tiny group of people are able to move through their own pain, their own fear and anxiety to discover new life as they encounter Christ's gift of resurrection love. A community who are able to know within and among themselves an experience of life that transforms their whole being. As the risen Christ stands amid these frightened and confused people, he doesn't berate them for their failure to stand with them. He shows them his wounded hands, and in so doing, he offers them the gift of peace. He offers them his shalom, a sense of calm, of wholeness, of new possibility. Recognizing their fears, he touches them, and he lets them touch him. He tells them of their role as witnesses, as those who must see and hear and testify to the resurrection, to the gift of new life. He affirms the potential that lies within each of them, and then he sends them forth to live within the best within themselves. I want to suggest this morning that this call to witness to new life is also our call at this time. A good witness is one whose attentiveness allows him or her to see and hear and feel in such a way that he or she is totally connected to the world around, able to testify. As witnesses to resurrection life, we are called to live with that kind of attentiveness that sees and hears and knows the stories of all who share in life with us, and to testify to their potential. In that movie Phenomena, George testified by learning a second language, by studying the potential of solar energy, by listening to a child's fear. So what does testifying, what does witnessing look like for us in this time? It can be so easy to become numbed, overwhelmed by the depth of sorrow and grief that so many people are experiencing right now. We risk, in that, becoming so in tune by fear and sorrow that we lose our ability to witness to Easter's gift of new life. There are so many ways to witness to resurrection, especially in this time. For example, maybe we choose to hold someone in our community each day, someone different each day. Maybe we choose to hold a group of people, the unemployed, our children, our grandchildren, our healthcare workers and first responders. We bear witness by holding them in prayer. We testify to hope's presence when we look out our windows and count the signs of new life. One of the most powerful witnesses to holy love and goodness that I think is operative in our world and in our cities right now is this group of people who've come to be called caremongers. And some of you may have heard about them or seen stories about them on the news. These are people reaching out who've become aware of the most vulnerable. Seniors who need groceries, people who need translation as they're struggling to know what to do and where to go, people needing prescriptions picked up, families of healthcare workers needing babysitters, needing people to help them in various ways that are safe but that provide support. William Sloane Coffin, a great American preacher, wrote, "As I see it," he said, "the primary religious task these days is to try to think straight. You can't think straight with a heart full of fear, for fear seeks safety, not truth. If your heart's a stone, you can't have decent thoughts, either about personal relations or about international ones. A heart full of love, on the other hand, has a limbering effect on the mind. Bearing witness has much to do with opening our eyes and ears as we move through our fears, touching the wounds of our world, making visible the risen Christ. Many who hear the story of Christ's resurrection, many who hear that story of his appearance to the disciples and to Thomas, kind of look at Thomas with a critical eye because he wants to see with his own eyes. And yet it's Thomas who reminds us that faith and bearing witness are about seeing what's truly real and trusting in the goodness of God. As he beheld the risen one, Thomas met the God and continued to be faithful to him and to love him despite his skepticism. We need to remember Thomas is us. As we struggle, as we search, and as we doubt, God is there, keeping faith with us, loving us into all the potential that lies within each of us. As we are enabled to see and hear, we will bear witness in word and actions to this new life. I know it's not easy. This gift of resurrection life will indeed. It can frighten, it can even anger some people. In the movie, George discovered that his gifts did scare some people. Many wanted to see him as extraordinary, as an exception. George reminded them that his gifts and their gifts were ordinary. They lay within them. Before George himself ultimately succumbs to a brain tumor, he asked people to continue to witness from the best within themselves. A glimpse into that same community a year later reveals a people living with a whole new level of care and respect. William Sloane Coffin defines spirituality this way. He says it's living the ordinary life extraordinarily well. For those of us who find ourselves living in the season of Easter in 2020, isn't that our calling? To live the ordinary life extraordinarily well. We are who we are because of what we have witnessed, because of what we witnessed as we stood amongst the jeering clouds in Holy Week, as we stood at the foot of the cross, as we stood beside the empty tomb. Like the first community of faith, we are people transformed by what we've seen and heard and experienced. We are witnesses to resurrection life. We have seen and heard, we have touched and felt the goodness